I've spent the last 2 episodes of the Mortarboard podcast interviewing people with truly broad views of tenure, and that's generated a lot of comments. There's general agreement among listeners that tenure is threatened, but little consensus about how to characterize that threat. My thoughts are ahead. The tenure system may be the most vulnerable of higher education institutions. Imported from Europe, the system was originally intended to provide job protection in a time when universities were scarce, which meant that job loss might require relocation to another country entirely. The practice of tenure has always straddled the practical world with the noble idea of academic freedom. Professors valued academic freedom not only because having it allowed them to speak and write freely, but because the absence of academic freedom could result in the need to relocate to the nearest university with an available position which might be hundreds of miles away in another country. Early American universities were modeled after Oxford and Cambridge, both physically and structurally, and so the tenure system was a crucial import. Tenure added a certain legitimacy to American higher education. After all, only a country that took seriously higher education generally and academic freedom specifically would create a system that guaranteed lifetime employment for professors, regardless of their productivity or their ideology. Today, the original justifications for tenure can seem quaint or antiquated. Most professors don't engage in research or ideological debates that would attract much public attention, much less need protection. All fields have controversial aspects to them, but most professors aren't necessarily engaged in those controversies. One chemical engineering professor said to me, "There's little controversy in my field that the public or academia generally would care about it, and zero controversy in my own work." With thousands of colleges and universities in the United States alone, job loss does not require a visa. As I record this, in Terre Haute, Indiana, a city of just 70,000 people, there are 17 universities and colleges within commuting distance of my house, and that doesn't even include online. Finally, the race to assemble credentials to satisfy the tenure process has resulted in a predictable ultra-specialization within disciplines, so that even when a scholar takes a stance on an issue, that stance is heard by an ever-decreasing circle of people. At least one study has found that the average academic article is read by about 10 people, and half of all published articles are not read by anyone. The result is that schools see less need for tenured positions, and the public, which is often reflected in state legislatures, sees less need for academic freedom protections. With an ever smaller percentage of tenured teachers to stand up for the practice and to be affected when it's threatened, and an ever increasing desire among schools for financial flexibility, the tenure system is being tested like never before. There are many ways to see this. At one end of the spectrum, we can see tenure as threatened in isolated cases. And at the other end, we can see it as a thing that is already essentially gone. That view was described in detail by a recent guest on my podcast, John Warner of Inside Higher Ed and the Chicago Tribune. I'll put a link to my 2 recent podcasts on the subject in the notes below. I think the demise of tenure, no matter what point we sit along that spectrum, is terrible. It's terrible for academic freedom. It's demoralizing for faculty who use it to justify the already mediocre wages they earn, or who may falsely believe that their school will stand behind them when disagreement erupts. And it's destructive to the concept that we can entertain ideas without accepting them. But the state of tenure isn't the core problem. It's a symptom of a problem, and that problem runs much deeper. How do we convey that ideas have worth regardless of what those ideas are? How do we help people to value educators in addition to education? How do we show people that the ideas that come out of higher education are often unique to higher ed, are the product of the unique higher ed environment, and won't appear in any other venue? As a journalist, I don't feel it's my job to support tenure specifically, but I do think it's beyond argument that education at all levels is worth supporting. And higher education often means, as I referenced earlier, and it's often mistakenly attributed to Aristotle, that it is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. My worry is that higher education, which for years marginalized skills training in favor of intellectual development, will become the reverse, a credential factory that teaches people every skill except to think for themselves. To me, that's the embodiment of tenure, to think for oneself and to disregard, to refuse to accommodate the reaction one might anticipate to new and disturbing ideas. History is full of new disturbing ideas from which humankind advanced and from which we now benefit. Higher education and the tenure that's been part and parcel of that has been an integral part of that advance. Whether in the future tenure remains an education construct or a subset of employment rights that includes educational free thought, I don't know. But I do know that the academic freedom of American higher education is a central part of what has made our system the envy of the world. Okay, I'm walking on the far side of the edge of editorializing, so I'll stop there. If you want to support this channel, the like and subscribe button are right there for you to express that. I'll talk to you next time.